The fall of Bosra sent a shockwave that rattled the very foundations of the Eastern Roman Empire. To understand the sheer magnitude of the storm that was now gathering against the Muslims, we must shift our focus far to the north, to the city of Antioch. Antioch was the command center of the Byzantine Emperor Heraclius. Heraclius was no armchair monarch inherited into luxury. He was a hardened, brilliant military veteran. Just a few years prior, he had personally led the Roman legions to completely crush the Sassanid Persian Empire in a grueling, decades-long world war. When the dispatch riders arrived at his court with the news from the southern frontier, Heraclius realized a terrifying truth. The destruction of the Ghassanid allied army at Hawarin, the lightning march across the trackless desert, and now the surrender of the impregnable capital of Arabia, these were not the actions of disorganized desert raiders looking for seasonal plunder. This was a highly coordinated, strategically brilliant invasion of his empire, and the man leading it, Khalid ibn al-Walid, was a generational military threat. Let us look at the strategic map from the Roman perspective. Heraclius understood that if he allowed Khalid ibn al-Walid to continue picking off fortresses one by one, Syria would be lost. He needed to deploy a force so overwhelmingly massive that no amount of Arab tactical brilliance could overcome it. He issued emergency imperial decrees to all the provinces. Veteran legions from Armenia, heavy infantry from Anatolia, and Christian Arab auxiliaries from the northern Levant were mobilized. He chose a concentration point in the southwest of Palestine, a place called Ajnadayn, located between Jerusalem and the Mediterranean coast. Why Ajnadayn? Because Heraclius, a master strategist himself, saw a fatal flaw in the Muslim deployment. While Khalid ibn al-Walid, Abu Ubaidah, Shurabil, and Yazid were operating in the east near Bosra and the Yarmouk River, another major Muslim commander, the legendary Fox of the Arabs, Amr bin al-As, Radi Allahu Anhu, was operating far to the south, pinned down near the valley of Araba. Heraclius planned to assemble an unstoppable force of 90,000 men at Ajnadayn. This colossal army would march down, wedge itself between Amr bin al-As and Khalid ibn al-Walid, and crush the isolated Muslim corps one by one. It was a classic strategy, defeat in detail. The very tactic Khalid had used against the Romans, Heraclius was now preparing to use against the Muslims. The Roman war machine was fully awake. 90,000 heavily armored, highly disciplined professional soldiers were marching to the assembly point under the command of the seasoned Roman general Warden, supported by the emperor's own brother, Theodorus. Before we witness how Khalid ibn al-Walid counters the greatest military threat the Muslims have ever faced, I notice that the vast majority of you watching haven't subscribed yet. Now, let us return to the gathering storm. Back at Bosra, it was late July, 634 AD. Khalid ibn al-Walid's intelligence network, a sophisticated web of local informants and fast-riding scouts, uncovered the massive Roman build-up at Ajnadayn. Khalid immediately grasped the extreme existential danger of his situation. The first rule of warfare when facing a numerically superior enemy is concentration of force. If Khalid stayed at Bosra to consolidate his new conquests, the 90,000-strong Roman army would easily march south and completely annihilate the corps of Amr bin al-As. Once Amr was destroyed, the Romans would turn their massive numbers against Khalid. To prevent this disaster, Khalid made a bold, decisive strategic decision. He would not wait for the Romans to dictate the terms of the war. He would abandon his immediate push toward the ultimate prize of Damascus. Instead, he would march his entire unified force southwest, deep into Roman Palestine, to link up with Amr bin al-As and face the Roman Goliath head-on at Ajnadayn. He sent the fastest riders the desert could produce, south to the valley of Araba and to Yazid, south of the Yarmouk. His orders were absolute: break off all current operations, march at once, concentrate all forces at Ajnadayn. But the march of the Muslim army from Bosra was a logistical phenomenon unlike anything the Romans had ever seen. When a Byzantine legion marched, it was a purely military column supported by massive, slow-moving baggage trains of heavy wooden wagons and ox carts. The Muslim army, however, was a moving nation. As the warriors under Khalid and Abu Ubaidah broke camp, they did not leave their families behind in fortified cities because they had no fortified cities to rely on. They traveled with their wives, their children, and their elders. They brought with them vast herds of sheep, goats, and camels. This was their mobile supply depot. They were entirely self-sufficient, untethered from static, vulnerable supply lines. The women of the Muslims were not mere spectators. They were fiercely dedicated to the cause of Islam. They managed the complex logistics of moving the camps. They tended to the wounded. They organized the water supplies. And, as Roman historians would soon discover, to their horror, they were perfectly willing to draw swords and fight if the camp was ever threatened. It was a desperate race against time. The dust of the Muslim migration rose high into the blazing Syrian sky as they pushed their horses and camels to the absolute limit, marching relentlessly toward the gathering storm in the west to save Amr bin al-As. In the final days of July, the vanguard of Khalid's army arrived at the rolling plains of Ajnadayn. Shortly after, a massive cloud of dust appeared from the south. It was Amr bin al-As, arriving just in time with his veteran corps, having successfully evaded the Roman blockade. Yazid's corps arrived soon after. The reunion of the Sahaba was a moment of profound relief. The commanders embraced. The soldiers chanted the takbir, Allahu Akbar, their voices echoing across the hills of Palestine. For the first time in the history of the Islamic conquests, the entire military might of the Rashidun Caliphate in Syria was gathered on a single battlefield. Khalid ibn al-Walid now commanded a unified army of approximately 32,000 men. It was a formidable force of battle-hardened veterans, men who had shattered the Sassanid Persians in Iraq, crossed the land of death, and broken the black walls of Bosra. But as the Muslim commanders rode to the crest of the hills, overlooking the plains of Ajnadayn, the cheering in the ranks slowly died down. The sheer scale of what they were facing became terrifyingly clear. Stretching across the horizon, consuming the landscape as far as the eye could see, was the camp of the Imperial Roman army. It was a city of canvas, silk, and iron. Tens of thousands of tents were laid out in perfect, rigid geometric grids, demonstrating flawless Byzantine military engineering. The banners of dozens of different legions and imperial regiments snapped in the wind. The sunlight reflected blindingly off a sea of iron-scale armor, bronze helmets, and thousands upon thousands of heavy spear tips. General Warden had successfully concentrated his reported 90,000 imperial troops. They had heavy infantry. They had thousands of elite archers. They had the devastating, fully armored cataphract cavalry. The mathematical reality was brutal. The Muslims were outnumbered nearly 3-1. In an open-pitched battle, the Roman heavy infantry was designed to simply walk forward and physically crush a lighter force through sheer, overwhelming weight and numbers. The eve of the battle fell over Ajnadayn. The contrast between the two camps could not have been more stark. In the massive Roman camp, fires burned bright. The sounds of armorers sharpening swords and the confident shouts of veteran legionaries filled the night air. General Warden and Theodorus sat in their opulent command tents, reviewing their battle lines. They were supremely confident. They had the numbers, the heavy armor, and the emperor's mandate. Across the dark plain, the Muslim camp was quiet. There was no arrogance, there was no boasting. Khalid ibn al-Walid spent the night organizing his troops, riding through the camp, inspecting the ranks, and assigning his trusted commanders to their vital positions. He knew that one mistake tomorrow would mean the annihilation of Islam in the Levant. But the Sahaba possessed a weapon that the Romans could not mathematically calculate. They spent the night in deep prayer, reciting the Quran, placing their absolute trust in Allah. The lines were drawn: 32,000 Muslims, 90,000 Romans. The fate of the Middle East hung in the balance. The sun rose over the rolling plains of Ajnadayn, burning away the morning mist to reveal a terrifying reality. To the west, the Roman army had deployed. It was not merely a military formation, it was a moving city of iron. 90,000 imperial soldiers were arrayed in a massive, unbroken battle line that stretched across the horizon for miles. At the front stood the heavy Byzantine infantry, the Scutitoi. They formed a solid, interlocking wall of heavy wooden shields rimmed with iron. Behind them, rank upon rank of veteran spearmen from Armenia and Anatolia stood in rigid, silent discipline. Behind the infantry, thousands of elite archers readied their composite bows, and waiting menacingly on the flanks were the pride of the Byzantine Empire, the cataphracts. These super-heavy cavalrymen were armored from head to toe in interlocking metal scales, their massive war horses draped in chainmail and boiled leather. General Warden had deployed his 90,000 men in a classic, crushing Roman formation. His strategy was simple and brutal. Use the archers to soften the enemy, use the heavy infantry to slowly grind them down, and then unleash the heavy cavalry to encircle and annihilate the survivors. Opposite this terrifying juggernaut stood the army of Islam. Khalid ibn al-Walid commanded just 32,000 men. The mathematical disparity was absolute. But Khalid did not panic. He rode out to the front of his army, his brilliant tactical mind rapidly analyzing the terrain and the enemy's disposition. He organized his forces into a highly flexible, mutually supporting formation. He placed the center under the command of the deeply respected Abu Ubaidah bin al-Jarrah. The powerful left wing was commanded by Yazid bin Abu Sufyan, and the right wing was given to the legendary Amr bin al-As. Khalid himself took command of a mobile elite reserve, ready to plug any gaps or exploit any weaknesses that might appear in the Roman lines. He then gave a crucial, non-negotiable order to all his commanders. No one is to initiate the attack until I give the command. You must hold the line. Finally, Khalid rode to the rear of the army, where the Muslim camp was located. Here stood the women of the Sahaba, the children and the elders. He addressed the women directly. He told them to arm themselves with tent poles, swords and stones. If any Roman broke through the lines, or if any Muslim warrior lost his nerve and tried to flee, they were to strike him down. The women fiercely agreed. There was no retreat. They would win on the plains of Ajnadayn, or they would die there. Before the order to advance was given, General Warden decided to attempt one final psychological blow. He believed the Arabs were merely starving nomads, driven out of the desert by poverty, totally out of their depth against a professional imperial army. From the center of the Roman lines, an old, highly decorated Christian bishop rode out on a mule, accompanied by an escort. He crossed the dusty, no-man's land and approached the Muslim lines, demanding to speak to their commander. Khalid rode out to meet him. The visual contrast was striking. The Roman envoy was draped in rich, expensive silks and gold ornaments, representing the immense ancient wealth of the Byzantine Empire. Khalid wore the simple, dust-caked clothes of a desert warrior. The bishop looked at Khalid with thinly veiled contempt. "We know that poverty and hunger have driven you from your lands," the bishop began. "You see the army before you. It is countless. You cannot possibly win, but Emperor Heraclius is merciful." The envoy then made an insulting offer. If you turn back now and leave Roman lands forever, the emperor will give every one of your soldiers a dinar, a cloak, and a turban. And to your commander, he will give 10 dinars. Khalid sat perfectly still on his Arabian horse. He did not look insulted, he looked resolute. He understood exactly what this was, an attempt to break their spirit before a sword was even drawn. Khalid leaned forward. "It is not hunger that brought us here," Khalid replied, his voice cold and unwavering. "We are a people who drink blood, and we have heard that there is no blood sweeter than Roman blood. That is why we are here." The bishop turned pale. The ideological chasm between the two armies was absolute. The Romans were fighting to protect their provincial borders and their tax revenue. The Muslims were fighting for the supremacy of Islam. They could not be bought. Realizing that intimidation was entirely useless, the bishop turned his mule and rode frantically back to the safety of the Roman lines. The time for talking was over. The time for iron had come. As the bishop returned to General Warden, the Roman commander raised his sword. A deafening roar erupted from the Roman lines. Thousands of war horns, the massive brass cornua of the Byzantine legions, shattered the morning silence. The sound rolled across the plains like a physical shockwave. Then, the true horror of facing a professional Roman army began. Warden ordered his archers and slingers forward. Tens of thousands of Roman archers stepped out from behind the heavy infantry. They knocked their arrows, aimed high into the sky, and released. The sky over Ajnadayn literally turned dark. A massive, whistling cloud of death descended upon the Muslim lines. It was a torrential rain of iron-tipped arrows. The Muslims immediately raised their leather and wood shields. The sound of thousands of arrows impacting shields, tearing through flesh and striking the rocky ground was deafening. Men began to fall. The cries of the wounded pierced the air. In ancient warfare, a sustained, massive arrow volley is designed to do two things: inflict casualties and shatter enemy discipline. The natural human instinct when being fired upon is either to break ranks and run away, or to break ranks and charge blindly forward in a rage. Either reaction would destroy the Muslim formation and allow the Roman heavy cavalry to slaughter them. The pressure on the Rashidun warriors was agonizing. They were bleeding, they were dying. The younger warriors desperately looked to their commanders, begging for the order to charge and close the distance. But Khalid's discipline held firm. Riding behind the lines, completely exposed to the arrow fire, he shouted to his men, "Hold your ground! Protect yourselves with your shields! Do not attack!" The Muslim center and wings absorbed the brutal punishment. They stood like mountains under the storm of iron. For over an hour, the agonizing barrage continued. General Wardan watched from his command tent. He was completely baffled. Any other tribal army would have shattered and fled by now under such a devastating barrage. Yet, the Muslim line, though bleeding heavily, remained perfectly, stubbornly intact. Frustrated, Warden decided to crush them with sheer weight. He ordered the archers to fall back. The massive Roman war horns sounded a second time. Slowly, the entire Roman heavy infantry line began to advance. 90,000 men marched forward, their heavy boots shaking the earth. The wall of massive oval shields and interlocking spears closed in on the battered Muslim lines. It looked like an unstoppable mechanical grinder coming to wipe them from the face of the earth. The distance closed. 200 yards, 100 yards, 50 yards. The tension in the Muslim ranks was coiled like a steel spring. They had endured the arrows. They had watched their brothers fall. They were begging for the release of combat. In the center of the formation, Khalid watched the massive wall of Roman iron bearing down on them. He waited until the Romans were just moments away from impact. Then, Khalid drew his straight Arabian sword. It flashed blindingly in the Syrian sun. He raised it high above his head, took a deep breath, and shouted a single phrase that echoed across the plains of Ajnadayn. Allahu Akbar! The agonizing wait is over. The two greatest military forces of the ancient world are about to collide in a bloodbath that will decide the fate of the Middle East. Next week, in Ajnadayn Part 2, we witness the terrifying rampage of Dirar bin al-Azwar, a treacherous Roman assassination plot against Khalid himself, and the total destruction of an empire's pride.